Hello and welcome to a new episode of Josh's Car Corner and a new episode of Project Crewman. I think this is the 12th part of this series now into restoring this thing, which is pretty exciting because there is a lot of progress that has been made since the last episode where I finished the engine. This episode is going to be a compilation. There is months of work that has gone on here putting this thing back together, predominantly in the engine bay, also some interior stuff too, which I'm going to take you back in time and work my way back forward to the present day to show you everything that has happened over the past few months. Okay, this is the first update of the progress on the Crewman since I got the firewall back in. As you can see, I have got the front body harness installed. So it's back there where it belongs, and it goes down along the bottom here, goes underneath. The whole car comes up, got a horn there, the washer bottle's back in, the overflow bottle's back in. I have the brake booster in right now, but it's mounted upside down. I realize I have to take it out and reposition it. And I got the wiper motor back on. I've actually fitted the cowl. Don't know if I've told anybody yet, but I actually was able to obtain a left-hand drive VZ Lumina cowl from Saudi Arabia. Or actually I think it came out of the UAE. So it'll actually fit under here and it'll fit with the factory VZ hood. So I'm very, very excited about that. Inside, I have got some of the dash assembled under here. I've got a brake pedal, although one of those brake sensors is not staying in place. I got a monkey with that. Got the gas pedal installed, and the fuse block over there is installed as well. Still a bunch of other wiring that has to get installed. The next big project, I think, is going to be getting the steering wheel in. Here's the steering wheel that came in the Crewman. Now, I'd love to use this steering rod and knuckle because look how good a shape that's in. But the problem is that little thing where it adapts on right there has only got 2 bolt holes. And if you look at the left-hand drive dash, there are 3 bolt holes there. So it will not work. I have to use the GTO one. And unfortunately, the GTO one I can clean it up, I suppose, but it's in a lot worse shape. It's missing that clip, though I could take it off of the Crewman one, but that's just nasty. I'd really love to pull this whole section out, because this comes out, because the whole thing telescopes, it'll come all the way out, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to be viable to do that, so I'm going to have to clean that up and reuse that. The next big interior thing to do is to get the HVAC box back in, but if I remember correctly, there's a little plastic tab I broke off of this thing on disassembly, an ear that I'm going to have to JB weld back on or something before I put the whole thing in. And then the next big thing on the outside is to get all of these hard lines back in the car, which I'm going to start looking at tonight. I actually bought, because I had to drill out a bunch of rivets that hold this thing in, I don't want to rivet it back in. I actually got for the first time a rivet nut kit, so I'm going to get down there tonight and see about pressing some rivet nuts into the holes that hold this thing so that I can take it on and out again if I ever need to, and it'll be held much more securely than anything outside of rivets. Okay, here I am under the car. So this is one of the places where all of the hard lines were originally riveted into the side of the car here. So what I've got here is something I've never used before. It's called a rivet nut tool. So this will crush this rivet into the hole, and it's already got threads in it. An M5 rivet is the perfect diameter for that hole. And then I can just, instead of using a rivet, just use a screw to hold these from now on. And if I ever need to take them off again, I can. Okay, really the key is I just got to get this as straight as I can before I compress it. Okay. Okay, it's getting easier. Okay, so now apparently all I got to do is back it off. Okay, and this unscrews it. So this should back it out of the new rivet. That did not appear to work very well. I mean, it's there and I backed this thing out, but I guess first time unlucky. but if I can get a screw in there, I should be okay. Well, it does go in. It's just the rivet's jacked up. But because this thing stands off of the metal, it should still work. Just got to get that out of there. It sits right in there. As long as I can get this down tight enough so it isn't going to rattle. Yeah, that doesn't move. Although I am going to want a fender washer on it. The hole in this thing is bigger than the nut. But that's okay. It works. Hopefully I'll have better luck with the other hole here. Okay, here's my second attempt at this. And this one went much better. So, two problems I learned on this tool. One, they only gave me one locking nut. And it's M8 size. And I'm using M5 rivet nuts. And they were actually... the color was going past the hole in here and in, so I had to get these washers that would fit it tighter around the tool so it would hold. And second, you don't squeeze it all the way, because I was actually snapping right through this. I wish I could get this out, because this is disgusting, but it will work for my purposes. The reason I didn't know about this, or not squeezing it all the way, is because this, again, is an Amazon tool, and all the instructions are in frickin' badly translated English. I made a video about this years ago about how crappy Chinese tools with English translation instructions are. They're the absolute worst. You can't make heads or tails of anything. So fortunately, I figured it out. Now I can do the last couple, and this will all be secured. No more permanent rivets. Okay, I've got my new freshly powder coated front subframe installed, and I've got a new GTO sway bar in there. Well, repainted GTO sway bar. I'm not sure if it's bigger or smaller than the Crewman one. I'm just gonna go with it because I had it out and I had a chance to paint it. But now it's time to actually align the front cradle. This is something a lot of people don't know about. Just like the rear cradle, the front cradle has an alignment tool, but there are very few of them in the United States up until a few years ago. There are a couple of places that make them now. One place that makes them is Bowman Customs in Chicago. He has a lot of parts for the GTO in stock. He's one of those guys out there that's still representing for the community and providing a lot of quality parts. He does these. He's most known for the brake conversion up kit, so you can put the big Brembo brakes on a GTO. But he also does things like interior illumination modifications. He does a thing where you can put a headphone jack in the factory radio. I have that modification done on the GTO. So then you can just plug anything with a headphone jack into it, and you can have iPod, cell phone, anything going through the factory stereo. It's a nice upgrade. Jeff Bowman sent me this tool. So it's just got this guide pointer right here, and then these two studs lock into holes on the subframe, and then this pointer points at a little mark on the front cradle to make sure this thing is perfectly aligned. And if you take the cradle out, it is a good idea to align it from the factory. It's been told many times these things are out of alignment from the factory because they don't use this tool on the production line. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing up in the car so you can see where it sits, and I'm gonna get this front cradle aligned so I can bolt it down and get it in for good. Right in front of where the radius rod busher would mount, there's a hole right there in the subframe. One on the other side too. That's where it goes up and in. And then you can see the mark right here on the subframe. This is what it points at for alignment. And you can get this thing out of alignment, so I'll just show you. It can move quite a bit. So you can rock it and get it that far out or get it that far out. And what that affects is all your alignments for steering. It'll affect, you can have more caster on one side than the other. You can have less caster on one side than the other. So it is important that you get this thing lined in here absolutely dead straight. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and get this baby torqued. And there you have it. The new front subframe is in. I also used brand new bolts from Rob at Wretched Motorsports. Got all new bolts for the entire front suspension from him. These bolts get 92 foot-pounds, and unlike the factory bolts, they are not torque to yield, which means they are reusable. So the way you're supposed to do it is get it all lined up, torque the back ones down first, then torque the front ones down. So everything gets 92, and this job is done. And I can finally start putting the rest of the hard lines and other crucial items into this engine cradle, so it's ready for the engine to be received. Okay, just want to do another little update here. As you can see, more progress has been made. Got most of the hard lines back in the car now. Most of the brake lines are here. The right front one is not here. For some reason, I thought the Crewman one I would just be able to reuse, but it's bent in a completely different way. That ABS module was different. It had a different port on the back side as opposed to the top side. Can't use it, so I'm gonna have to get another one. But all the other lines are in. The brake booster is still upside down. I haven't switched that yet. And I've got the AC line in. I have got that wheel speed sensor in. And Jack Torres, once again, helped me huge. Got me some of these clips that I needed. So I needed that wheel speed sensor clip and that AC clip. And he also got me, for the back here, this bracket. Now what this holds is the charcoal canister out of the GTO. I want to use that one because it has this extra sensor on it for US emissions, and I want to make sure that's in there. Well, the bracket that the Crewman used for its charcoal canister, this won't fit. This is smaller, so this is bigger, so I'm going to have to drill those spout welds out, put this plate in its place so I can mount that thing properly. As you can see, the hard lines are all back in, and they're not totally attached here. This is that GTO brake line that I installed. I have come up with a solution that I'm going to have to work to connect the brake lines. So the trick was going to be getting them from the frame of the car down to this point on the axle. And I think I found a solution here. What's in this bag of Funyuns right here is, so this is some brackets off of a 2014 up Silverado pickup. So you've got hard lines coming to the back of the frame, and then these soft rubber lines transition from the frame down to the axle. So I'm hoping to reuse this, and I might have to make a couple of modifications, but this will be my new way of transferring from the axle down to the frame, because remember, the Crewman only had the one brake line. Now I'm going with two, so I need to have the second line going here. So I think I can make this work. Another thing to show you in here is that the HVAC box is now reinstalled in the car. The fuse block over there is now actually bolted into the frame, and I have other frame pieces in. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to replace some of the pieces I got from that GTO front cut. This right here is supposed to live right there, and then a bunch of the dash frame pieces bolted, but look how rusty that thing is, and not everything fits into it quite right. So I could just have that sandblasted and I could repaint it, but I'm probably just going to try to get a clean one. Same thing with this. This is for the whole passenger side of the dash, and the glove box attaches to that, and the airbag sits in there. That's really rusty too, so I'm going to get that replaced as well. It's exciting to see the wiring right here for everything that's going to be added that GTOs and even all of the Commodores never got. So that is the airbag connector, active select. This one is the door lock. This one is the traction control. I'm just going to be excited to have all these extra buttons. So now that you've seen that, I got the chance to show you in more detail all the things that have happened up to the present day, especially in the engine bay. So right now I do have an ABS master sitting in here. This one is out of a VZ Calais from Australia. So this is one of the rare VZ models that got electronic stability program. So the only major difference between this and what comes in the GTO is that this block has got two different motors on it that are not there on the GTO. Those two different motors control the brakes and allows this thing to actually engage the brakes without you putting your foot down on the pedal to assist with stability control. I may be able to make it work with this whole setup, and that would be great. If not, I do have the G8 one I can try. That was designed to work with an E38 and a V8 car, so might go that way too. But this is just in here right now as a placeholder. I have all of the cooling lines in the car right now. I do have this one radiator hose I still need to clean up a little bit. And I do have all the heater core lines done. I have a brand new vacuum valve to control the heater core lines. Also have all of the vacuum lines done. The one going to the brake booster, it's with the intake manifold, but it'll be ready to go on the brake booster. The AC lines have all been run. all of the ABS sensors are now in place. That fourth brake line that I didn't have is now in place. It's sitting right here, but I haven't connected it to the block yet. That KYB rack is in here. I did not end up replacing the inner tie rods. The ones that were on there were in still pretty good shape. So I just got new outer tie rods because those wore out. You'll see I did end up cleaning up that steering rod, and I am using that GTO steering rack in here, but it cleaned up pretty nice. I just had to spend a couple hours with some wire wheels and some sandpaper to get as much of the rust off of it as I could, and then I'm using a rust inhibiting paint to hopefully keep it from re-rusting. Now, the one thing you'll see right away is that I do have a radiator in place right now, and this actually is the radiator that came with the Crewman when I bought it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to use this because the one thing I forgot about was transmission cooling lines. And the thing is with the GTO and all of the VZs, they actually gave them different radiators based on the transmission they came with. So the GTO, that had a manual radiator in it, and even though I have the spare that I had out of there, I can't use that. Nor can I use this one because this was also designed for a manual transmission car. It's missing 2 passages on the plastic tank on this right here below the filler cap. That's where the transmission cooling lines go, and there's just a little cooling element in here. It's not a lot, but it's good to have something. So to get around that, what I'm going to do is get another Mishimoto radiator for this thing in order to give some cooling to the 6L80 once I've got it in here. I also figured out how I'm going to use cooling lines for it. It's not completely figured out, but the broad strokes are figured out. Let me show you that right now. So back over here in this corner, I've actually got these lines. These are out of a V6 2012 Chevy Camaro. So they're the same as the 6L80, even though that car uses the 6L50 transmission, but the bodies are the same and where the cooling lines mount are in the same place. So my buddy Sean told me about this. So these ones are going to go underneath the transmission back over to the passenger side, which is ideal because the cooling passages on the radiator for the Mishimoto are on the passenger side of the radiator. So they're already going to be in the right place. And then they have quick disconnects on them like fuel lines do. So I can make lines that are going to have quick disconnects that will then just go up to the fittings on the Mishimoto and attach, and then they can be disconnected at those quick disconnect points on the hard lines if I ever need to take the radiator out or take anything back apart, make it a lot easier. One thing to point out with the power steering lines is I did have to do a little surgery on one of them. The return line, the hard line that goes from the rack up to the cooler in the front of the car, that was one that I got with that GTO front cut, and it was intact, but the fitting was rusted solid to the line. I took some heat to it and some PB Blaster, and I finally got it to work loose and spin around again, and I cleaned as much of the rust out of it as I possibly could. But every time I tried to put it on there and just gravity feed the system to make sure there were no leaks, it was leaking out of that fitting around the hard line. Some people online told me the right fittings I needed to get on the rack to adapt it. So then I've got a 45-degree elbow in there and a -6 rubber fuel line with silicone braiding on it, and it's just going a little distance right back to the hard line, and then it's hose clamped back down. So a little minor surgery, but it will work, and I did try to gravity feed it. Everything seals up now the way it's supposed to. And because that's the return side, it's lower pressure, so there shouldn't be any leaks. One thing I didn't get to mention yet in the front suspension is that I was able to make a huge score with retaining factory ride quality with this thing. I actually managed to track down some factory front strut assemblies in brand new OE condition. These are actually the ones that come in the GTO. And I was amazed to find out that they're for sale right here in Wisconsin, about an hour, 10 minutes south of me, at a place called Vintage Parts. So Vintage Parts is a company that takes stock out of the GM dealer network when they no longer want it in the dealer network. They give them to Vintage Parts, and Vintage Parts holds on to them. And there are a lot of parts for the GTO and a couple of parts for this thing that cross with the GTO that you can track down, one of them being those front strut assemblies. And then I also managed to get some brand new OE strut tower cups for them, and then strut tower bushings. I went with the rubber ones because I'm trying to maintain a factory ride quality. I want it to be nice and compliant. The other thing is I got some new sway bar links. Now here's the funny thing I learned from down in Australia. Our factory sway bar links have got the one end, it's like a tie rod, and then the other end, the one that goes into the strut, it's got the two rubber bushings, and then it's squeezed down with a bolt and a washer to hold it in place. Now if you ever upgrade to like a Petter setup or a BC coilover setup, you end up getting sway bar links that have got those tie rod ends on both sides as opposed to just the side that attaches to the sway bar. That I found out is actually the VZ style for attaching things. What we got in the GTOs, even though they are technically VZ cars, that is actually the VY suspension setup. So they actually gave us older suspension parts, just another cost-cutting measure to make the GTOs cheaper in the United States. I find that kind of funny. And so this has technically got a VY front suspension setup in it, even though it's parts for the GTO, which is a VZ. It's funny. I just love that kind of trivia. So now you know it too. Well, as you can see in the interior here, not much has changed. I did get some new frame bracketry from my buddy Jared down in Arizona that's got all of the GTO spare parts. So that passenger side bracket's in place now. I still got to mount the airbag for it. And the one for the radio is in place in the middle. And then there was a bracket that goes up to the steering rack over here on this side that I had to get. And then also got the steering wheel mounted, and I can turn the wheels and everything works just like it should. I still have a lot of work to do in here, but I'm in a much better situation to get work done in here now that I've got all that bracketry. The last thing I want to do to conclude this episode is get this rear axle installed in the car. What's holding me up right now is that I want to get good new bushings in there just to make sure everything is nice and up to spec. So I got to get those out of Australia, but once I get them, then I got to pick the back of this thing up. It's going to be tricky lifting the back end up because even though there's a ladder frame back there, it is not very strong metal. I've tried lifting on it before with my engine hoist, and if you just try to lift on one point, you end up stretching and twisting that metal because that box steel is not very thick. It's not very strong. So I need to come up with a better way to do it. And the way I came up with is I've got the factory receiver trailer hitch for it. And if I bolt that on, that would be a great place to lift because that's really thick, solid steel. Then I've got an easy way to lift the back end up. Then we can get this rear axle installed, and that'll be one more big milestone in getting this thing running again. Okay, as you can see, I've got hanging here the factory receiver hitch for the Crewman. This is actually a genuine Holden part, and it's got some really cool stuff on it that I wanted to show you. It just got returned from the sandblaster. They cleaned it all off for me, and it uncovered this badge on the bottom here, which is really cool. It's full of all of this information to show you that this is a genuine Holden part. It actually has the part number for the receiver hitch itself, and they even break it down for a two-wheel drive version and an all-wheel drive version. I love this stuff. I think it's just so cool. I geek out on it. I love how Holden puts the part numbers for the parts on everything so you know what they are.
There's also another sticker on the back right here on the top of the bar where the actual hitch goes in. That's an actual sticker, and I made sure they preserve that because it's got more information on it. It's got the Holden logo. Again, more stuff I geek out on. But tonight's goal is to get this whole thing primed and painted so it's ready to bolt to the back of the Crewman, and then I can use this to lift the back end up when it comes time to put the rear axle in.
Well, you saw me painting that trailer hitch, and now you get to see the final result behind me. Not only is the hitch painted and bolted to the frame, it gave me the opportunity to use it to lift the back end of the car up so I could get rid of that fake rear axle that was in there. And I took the opportunity to re-primer and repaint the entire frame in a flat black, which I know is not going to be everybody's cup of tea because it's not going to be body color like a Crewman should be, but every American truck has got a black painted frame on it, and this is no different as far as I'm concerned. You're never going to see it, and this was the only opportunity I was going to have to get it painted up to make sure it's not going to rust any more than it was when I saw it. The last thing I'm going to do is get the rear axle swung up and into this thing so it has one again. And in order to do that, I got to redo these springs. I just went ahead and replaced the bushings, and I got polyurethane bushings out of Australia. These are Super Pros. And the shackle bushings were actually not that hard. These actually had poly bushings in them before, so it was a really easy change. These ones though, the spring eye bushings, were a huge pain in the ass because they were still the original rubber bushings that have that metal shell that holds them in. So I had to take a torch and set them on fire and melt all of the rubber out of them. Then I had to sit there and cut the shells with a hacksaw and actually take the blade apart and put the saw back together with the blade in the thing so I could even cut it. Then I had to get a pliers in there and actually grab the thing and twist it and get them out of there. That took 5 hours for both of the springs, so that was not an enjoyable experience, but we got these brand new bushings in here. I'm gonna get these swung in. I've also got the mounting brackets for the spring eyes back in there, and I'm gonna swing these in and hang it, and then I'm gonna take the axle, slide it around, get it up on the perches, and then I'll get the U-bolts on and secure it down. Then I'll swing the rear parts of the springs up to the shackles and get this thing fully installed. Okay, so I'm putting the U-bolts onto the lower spring perches and bolting the rear axle to the leaf springs, right? So here is the dilemma that I'm facing. So the U-bolts that came on the Crewman, remember, it had that fake axle. It wasn't a real axle. And it had U-bolts on it that I thought I'd be able to use. I thought they were just stock U-bolts. They looked factory. The problem is, I think they came off either a base or an S model because they weren't long enough to get through to the bottom things. I think because the SS springs have got these spacer pieces here to lower the rear suspension. So they weren't long enough. Unfortunately, then I discovered that the leaf springs that came from Australia, which were off an SS, had 40 millimeter lowering blocks on them, which means the U-bolts themselves are 40 millimeters longer to accommodate for that, so they'll reach through the holes on the bottom mounts. But now that means I'm having to turn these bolts up 40 millimeters of shank before they're even tightening. And none of my deep well sockets are long enough to get the job done, which is ridiculous. And by the way, they're 18 millimeter bolts, and I don't have a deep well 18 in impact, so that's making it even more fun. So I do have that side done. It's all torqued down. Once I get this one torqued down to spec, I'll be ready to put the shackle hangers on, and then I can get my engine hoist in here, lift the rear end up, and then I can get the shackle pins in place and get the whole rear end together and get one step closer to getting this thing back on the ground and making it rear wheel drive again. Okay, coming down. And there we go. For the first time in at least 7 years, the Crewman has got a rear axle again. This is a huge moment, and I'm glad to finally have gotten this all buttoned up. It may not be as pretty as I would have wanted, but at this point, I really just want to get the thing running and get all the kinks worked out of it. So that's going to do it for this episode of Josh's Car Corner and Project Crewman. Next episode is going to be another big one. Drivetrain installation. Got the trans back. You know the engine's done. That's all going in on the next one. Look forward to that very soon. See you next time.